So, how I'm seen by others. I took the position of a rock star. And I mean that literally in that I have grown up as a musician, around musicians, around artists, and sometimes I feel like people only see me for that, or that's like that's like my inevitable like outcome or trajectory is to be a rock star or musician. And it's also like it's not entirely imposed on me. Like it's something I think about wanting sometimes. But like, I mean, that was one of the reasons I didn't go to music school. You know, I wanted to like prove everyone wrong about me, that like I can be something else. I can be this other person. So yeah.
And then what about for the one of who you really are?
So who I really am, I kind of went into a, just like cross-legged, arms crossed. The arms crossed is a very like, has like a specific meaning to me because it's something that we would do in Waldorf school, and it was like folding your fairy wings, you know. Like that was like when we were in kindergarten, like that was like when we would like circle up or like be or starting the day, like we would always kind of like this was like sort of a ritual of like, you know, getting ready for something or kind of just like sort of meditative, I guess. And then also that's kind of like I've always felt like very centered in that position and being cross-legged. It's usually how I meditate, it's just like a very comfortable, centering, grounding, and neutral position for me, that feels like my identity and who I am. So kind of like And I guess also something I was thinking about in having my arms crossed, something I was feeling was kind of like the role I feel that's like part of my destiny, you know, of like diplomacy and like being the mediator. That's like something I've felt is like deeply a part of me that I both identify with like as like my own free will and like free choice to be who I am, but also like that is like something that feels bigger than me, that like I'm supposed to be doing this, or like it was written kind of thing. So that's where like all the feelings and ideas come from that position.
How did you like come to know that, like this sense that is part of your destiny?
I mean, I think it's come in different phases throughout my life, where I have had kind of like no choice but to fill that role, but also where I choose to be taking that role. I think like the first big one that comes to mind is just like being that person between my parents, like when they were separating, being that person between friends. You know, I went to grade school and high school in like really small classes, so there was a lot of drama, and just like and we were stuck with each other, you know. It's right. Like we have to be around each other. So like I've often found myself trying to like help my friends work things out between each other, and it felt good, like being that person, you know. Sometimes it felt overwhelming, but ultimately it was like it felt good to be doing that. And then like more recently in college, kind of like just getting really frustrated with how like polarized things have become, like in all senses of it, just like politically, where like whenever there's an argument, it just feels useless to try and find commonality or intersection. We're just kind of like very set in being like you're with us or against us kind of mentality. And so like I feel it just feels really good to challenge that, and that seems like who I am as a person, is to be the person that challenges that war. And you know, I mean, it's just like really corny, but just like, yeah, I'm for peace and love, you know, and that is like that's who I am. Yep. Fucking hippie. Yeah, for sure.
And how, I mean, you explained your image a little bit. How does like that like destiny, how did that show up in the image that you did for who you are?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I wasn't thinking about that kind of, like, I started thinking about the idea of destiny in that role kind of after, like, just on reflecting now on the position. But thinking about, like, something you said in looking at it was that it's kind of closed with the arms like this. And I think that is part of the limitation and restriction I feel, in that, like, it's out of my control. You know, it's like...
What's out of your control?
My destiny.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
You know, that, like, it's... yeah, that everything is predetermined, and like I'm just following the path that I'm meant to follow, and that can feel disempowering sometimes, but ultimately, I think, I mean, a big part of kind of healing for me has been the aspect of like surrendering, and just kind of, yeah, surrendering to something bigger than me. That I can't be in control of everything, and that simultaneously feels empowering, but also like restrictive and, you know, confining at the same time. So like, yeah, that closeness is like, yeah, kind of embodying that inner conversation or dialogue I'm having with myself about it being something that is that is both of those things. Yeah. So, yeah.
And tell me about your last image that you did.
So I'm standing, and my arms are open, kind of like 45 degrees, like, yeah, like a triangle. And that is kind of challenging the closedness of who I am, you know, that the folding of the wings or the arms, that I'm opening up, that I want to be more open and receptive, and I want to be upright. You know, I'm getting on my feet. I'm kind of like allowing myself to move and take action, and not holding myself down is kind of the idea of like standing up in that position. And yeah, I think really the core of who I want to be is open. I mean, that is what that position was kind of trying to communicate. Yeah.
And how could you incorporate more like openness in your life to get to that point of like who you want to be?
I guess I've just like allowed a lot of fear to sort of like govern my decision making in recent years, as a result of kind of like the bigger circumstances of the world, of just like what's happening right now, and like just feeling like overwhelmed, and then also just like in my personal life, in like my relationships with people, yeah, kind of allowing this fear to be kind of the source of my a lot of the decisions I make for myself and with others. And that's to say that, like, I guess I've just, like, gone through some hard times with people in the past, and, like, I simultaneously value the hardships, you know, as, like, growth, but I also am, like, kind of done with it. Like, I want to, you know, I want to feel groundedness, and, like, I want to feel loved, and I guess I've part of that sense of fear is, like, I guess abandonment, and, like, just, like, attachment, and, like, those sorts of things. So I think, like, part of wanting to be more open is trying to get past that, like, this guard that I've put up to try and protect myself, and ultimately that kind of results in me just suppressing what I'm feeling a lot of the time, and it's not really good for me. I mean, I think it has taught me a lot to be mindful of, like, when to be open and when not to be, because it's, I mean, we can't be fully open all the time, but I do think that's still something I feel good about working towards in the person that I want to be. And honestly, I think everyone could benefit from, you know, working towards that also. 'Cause it can feel really lonely sometimes, and I think I let that loneliness form a lot of the time. So just trying to be more open and receptive in general.
That's really sweet.
Thank you.
And I'm also curious, when we were doing the exercise, you mentioned, you've done these exercises before, and you were kind of, like, mentioning about how, like, the experience of doing these exercises now, years later, compared to, like, before. Can you tell me a little bit more about, like, that, and, like, the differences, the similarities, and just, like, your overall experience having done it again years later?
I mean, I don't remember exactly what the positions were, but I do remember me interacting more with things around me.
Before?
Before. In making the images. And that has a lot to do with just, like, where you're deciding to do it.
Right.
And, like, but I think that's interesting, that it feels like the images that I made were a little bit more kind of like, this is just my body in space, you know? And, like,
This time
it felt more like that. That, like, I could be in a sea of nothingness and those images would still be the same images, you know? Whereas, like, in the past, I've interacted with materials and objects around me that kind of are part of the image and inform the image. I don't know, I was just thinking about how, like, there's value to growth that is, like, individual growth, like, on your own, and then there's also the value of growing together with others. And so, like, at that time I was very, very collaborative with others and very, like, immersed in community spaces, especially, like, creatively, like, just being in, like, a theater cohort and, like, you know, all that kind of stuff. Whereas now my work has been very, I mean, I'm doing my senior project and just a lot of more personal, individual work. And so I think that could be coming through in the images. There is this sense of of solitude, a little bit, not necessarily loneliness, but solitude.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the things I noticed. But like I said, I think that if I were given these prompts any day, they would change.
Right.
You know,
Totally.
I feel very different about all those ideas, how I see myself, how others see me, how I want to be seen. Those change so much.
Yeah.
And as they should. I mean, like, yeah, that's one of the things. I think that's the other thing with like striving to be open, is that I never want to like confine myself to an identity. You know, I'm very like I try to be flexible with that. I mean, like, I'm an interdisciplinary studies major. I go, you know, I use any pronouns. I don't like choosing things.
Yeah.
And because I feel like it can limit me to what I want to be and how I want to be seen. So yeah, that openness, I think, that's part of it too. Yeah. I guess it's really nice to kind of bring some awareness and intention back into this sort of way of embodied recognition, like something that I only really was really like thinking about in this way, like when we were like in those classes, you know, and like it feels really good to revisit these prompts, and just a reminder like how important the body is in understanding ourselves or learning things about ourselves and others. Yeah, it's really nice to revisit that. Yeah. So for my image of oppression, I was holding my head down to the ground by my hair with my left hand, and my right hand was raised up in a fist, like as if about to punch something. Should I talk about what that means?
I would love to know
Okay.
more.
Yeah, so I guess thinking about when I've done this prompt before, I think my tendency is to embody oppression as the oppressor or the oppressed.
Okay.
So like my default as the oppressor is to take on this sort of, you know, assertive, dominant, like masculine kind of position.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe arms crossed, or, you know, just like towering, trying to make myself bigger.
Yeah.
And then like oppressed, I default into this kind of like, you know, small position of like, you know, wrapping myself into a ball and like yeah, just making myself invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I like intentionally wanted to challenge those two kind of default positions that I take, because, and like I noticed that like I kind of stayed in neutral for a while, and I started by putting my hands behind my head, like kind of defaulting into this oppressed position, right?
Yep.
And then I was like, wait, I'm like, it's both, you know, like oppression doesn't mean oppressed or oppressor. It's oppression, right? And so like to embody that, I tried to take those two like combating ideas and embody both of them together.
Yeah.
So that's where, you know, being pulled down by my hair is kind of part of the oppressed, taking on that position of like the fist in my right hand is the oppressor. And it's really interesting that you kind of saw me like punching myself in that, you know, because that wasn't necessarily what I was going for. This was like an offensive kind of stance, and this was a self-destructive stance. And those, I guess those are kind of the two things that oppression means to me, is like it's not just the oppression of others, but it's the oppression of yourself. And so that was really cool, just like, reflecting after hearing your how you were seeing it, and in a way they're both harmful, like to yourself, and yeah.
And how are they, for you, how are they both harmful to the self?
Well, I think that for one, I feel like I'm generally not a very violent or aggressive person.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been in a fight,
Mm-hmm.
a physical fight, and I just grew up around hippies, and
Yes.
like and maybe it's like very idealistic of me, because like I've also like thought a lot about violence, and like when is violence useful, when is it useful, or when can it be useful, and I think that where violence unto others is violence unto yourself feels like I resonate with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the more you harm others, like the more you kind of start to see yourself as inherently harmful, and you're trapped in that.
Yeah.
And I feel that a lot, just like being a student of like social justice studies who is white, and feeling like wanting to be an ally, but also feeling like a lot of the time like trying to help, I end up taking like up too much space, that like or I just feel like if I try to do good, like I'm going to do harm.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of how well intended I may be, that like I will inevitably cause someone harm in what I'm doing. And I think that that's true like even outside the context of like positionality and like things like that. But like I think that like oppression in that sense, and like in terms of like the social constructs of it, like gender and race, and like those are the things that make me feel like where I kind of confine myself into the role of the oppressor, like inherently, and like that's just who I am, that's who I'll be seen as, and there's nothing I can do about it. And that is oppressive, like to myself.
Right.
It's like, I mean, that's the Frere kind of like framework, is that like the oppressors are oppressed,
Right.
and that's why they keep oppressing.
Yeah.
Because it's like self-inflicted, and it's just a cycle of like oppression by having that distinction of like oppressors and oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a hard conversation to have with yourself or with others in the context of like those social constructs of positionality.
Mm-hmm.
But like like, okay, who's the oppressed, who's the oppressors, like who are you talking about specifically? But yeah, I guess just like embodying oppression itself, like these are the things that I think about, and like feeling all those things, all those truths overlapping and intersecting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then, like how do you move past that?
Well, I can talk about my transition, because I think that part of the image that I was trying to embody in that transition was, what was it? It was like, I'm like moving into the reclined position.
You're kind of like on your knees, sort of, and you're kind of going like this, maybe?
Yeah.
Or something like that?
It was, and this is like my right hand is kind of in this sort of questioning kind of position, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think, that's intentional, and that like the way that I can kind of move out of that confinement of my identity as oppressor or oppressed, or just as oppression, comes from questioning and curiosity, and kind of like accepting uncertainty, and that there are no absolute truths, and and just that everything changes, that like these are the things that inspire me to be creative and to be critical thinking and to be a student, a researcher, an artist, like, is that curiosity, like that kind of childlike sense of wonder and ignorance, you know. And I just think that's so important to, like, that unlearning is just as important as learning, to, like, you know, sort of cleanse or detox before you, like, receive more information. I mean, and yeah, I just think that keeping an open mind and, like, always be questioning truth is what helps me to to get to move past that confinement of identity, of oppression.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit about your final image for liberation.
Right. So I am reclined, kind of leaning on my.
Your hand was like
right.
down.
Yeah,
it was like straight.
It was down.
Yeah.
Like this.
And you're kind of
Yep. And then my left arm is kind of outstretched in like like opening kind of, you know, come give me a hug while I'm laying here.
Okay, so I got the vibe right. Yes, okay, great.
You totally, like, I think also, like, I realized that also, that it's like that embracive kind of, like, gesture. Embracive? Is that I don't know. Not abrasive, embracive. If it's not a word, anyway. It sounds weird.
It does sound weird, but I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm saying, yeah. But yeah, so that image is kind of I was resonating in the moment of finding that position with liberation as, like, the ability to just feel ease and, like, be able to recline, you know?
Yeah.
And just like we're here, let's relax, like, let's just take a minute, and, like, we can do that because we're free, you know, because we don't have an obligation or an oppression or something that is preventing us from being able to lay down and just chill, you know. So I think that which is really interesting, because I feel like I tend to really, like, intellectualize freedom and liberation in very different ways, but in this moment, that was it. It's like, that's liberation, just being able to chill out for a sec.
Yeah.
You know? And there is, like, a privilege to that, you know, that in society, like, you know, just the way that we kind of interpret, like, rest and work as, like, you know, very, like, clashing things in our lives that can't, like, coexist. Like, we can't do, like, workful rest or restful work, you know, that they're very much their own thing. Yeah. And I don't know, there's a part of me that's like, oh, what are you saying, liberation is laziness? You know, like, what are you laying down? Like, it's like, we got to do some work to get liberated, you know? Like, these are, like, all the, like, intellectual blah, 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 blah in my head. But I'm just like, yeah, it's just like, that's free. If we can just, you know, relax for a sec.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think it was different this time?
Well, I think it had a lot to do with the position that I was starting with in oppression, because it was something that I challenged myself to think differently about before I embodied it. You know, normally I would be moving from an oppressor position or an oppressed position instead of an oppression position.
Yeah.
And how that informs what liberation looks like when you look at oppression as from the perspective of the oppressor or the oppressed. That will significantly alter the way that you come to that sense of liberation in your image. So yeah, I mean, I think just throughout the prompts, I was challenging myself to think differently about these things in a way that I have a tendency to think about them. And that was like super informative. I mean, like just the movement of finding what these things mean. Because it's almost like, I'd almost rather you'd be like giving me this prompt to dance to, so it's all movement, because it's hard to kind of find one image.
Yeah.
And but that's where I was really glad that you asked for like the transitional image between the two. And I know I've done this exercise with multiple images on the journey from oppression to liberation. But it helped me to kind of really think about and feel everything in moving from that position to the intermediate position to the final position, and like allowing myself to have that embodied recognition of what it was feeling like. Because I think I often with these prompts, like, I feel pressured to find the image, like, figure it out and do it. But that neutral space of like finding is so important, to really think about the words and what they mean. And
And how did you like come to that idea of like finding an image for these prompts through like moving? Because we never really, like, I don't think I ever did that with Ruth necessarily. So like this is a new perspective for me, so I'm wondering like how you got to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was probably something we may have talked more about in acting and non-acting.
Okay.
But like there's one particular experience that it's not like my fondest memory. Yeah. But it also was important. I remember doing a cold reading of an adaptation of Hippolytus, which is a Greek tragedy, and it's very dark. And Hippolytus is kind of this, and in the way that it was rewritten, it was modernized, takes place in the 90s, and so Hippolytus is kind of true to his original character. He's this, womanizer, very sexist, and in the original, he's like, abstaining from sex with women. Okay. And that makes him this very pure, like, kind of guy. Whereas in this adaptation, they kind of flip it, and he's a sex addict. Okay. And he's, can't feel anything anymore. He just like is addicted to sex. And so I volunteered to read his part in the cold reading. And so I started reading his lines, and I was making him sound like a fucking fuckboy, just like, and Ruth was like, "What the fuck are you doing? Why are you doing that?" Like, Ruth. like she really called me out on that shit. She's like you are oppressing him right now. Like you are putting him in this box. Yep. And like why aren't you like finding his voice? Why are you asserting it on him? And and so I tried just using, and she was like, just talk just recite the lines in your normal voice and see what happens. Yeah. And so that is like the same thing in movement, is really being present in neutral. Yep. Otherwise, you're just going to impose some idea that's passing through your head about what this movement is or who this character is. And you're not letting that uncertainty or that unknowingness inform you. you're just deciding what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that was just like a profound learning moment for me.
Yeah.
That like we don't give space. We feel pressured to like, you know, have the answer quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And how harmful that is to your critical thinking and your ability to reflect and see things in a less biased way. Yeah. And so, I was feeling that in finding those positions through the movements that were transitional, neutral kind of moments of questioning and, yeah.
This was new food for thought for me. I'm really into it.
Awesome. I'm glad. Yeah.
Did you have like any revelations or like aha moments in either this set of exercises or like the last set of exercises that we did?
I mean, I would just echo everything that I just said. Yeah. I think that would probably be the biggest aha that I'm like aha. Uh-huh. Like, you know, yes. Like there were moments when that was very clear to me, and then, you know, I'm not doing like embodied exercises all the time. Like there was a time when I was doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so like having these prompts again is just reminding me of like that embodied recognition and ways of knowing through the body that are so important in the context of like education and like in every aspect of the word of just like growing and learning in a way that you leave space to figure it out and not make boxes for yourself and feel, you know, the pressure of time and space to get things done or to reach an answer or a conclusion. That these are the ways of inquiry and research, you know, through embodiment that have really helped me in college to think just to be open-minded and not immortalize or you know immortalize my conclusions or conceptions about the outcomes of my learning, and to always be open. There's always going to be changes and movement, so yeah, just those are aha moments for me still, even though it's like I've learned that before, but it's still like, oh yeah, that's it. Yeah, so
that's great. I don't have any more questions. Is there anything else that you want to say before we kind of like conclude this part of it?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for just being you, honestly.
Thank you.